So, folks, if you didn't hear, nerfs have been officially teased by Blizzard. We're going to have card changes for Mage, Paladin, Rogue, and neutral cards. And apparently they're going to hit sometime next week, which means we have a little while here to guess which cards are going to be impacted and how those cards might change. And I've got my list here in this video of the cards I think are most likely to be nerfed, but I'm certainly curious to hear all yours as well. So all that said, let's jump into our first card here. It's, of course, Deck of Lunacy. This is the card being most discussed among the community, among my peers, and also named by Blizzard as a card they're taking a close look at. Clearly, Lunacy Mage is the most popular deck on ladder right now. It's everywhere. And I get it, because it's actually really fun to play. You have all these super powerful turns. When you play Deck of Lunacy early, you draw a billion cards. Everything's super cheap. And you tend to just blow up your opponents with just absurdly efficient sorts of plays. And that's really enjoyable. The problem is, of course, that when you play Deck of Lunacy early, it has a stupendously high win rate. We're talking in the 70% win rate range, which is really quite ridiculous for Hearthstone. That's way too high and too consistent, even better than cards of old like Keleseth, for instance, on turn 2. And the real reason for that is there's just a little bit too much consistency in the deck building right now because of the limited card pool. There's too much card draw in particular off of Deck of Lunacy. They just refill their hands like crazy, and then they have some big power plays too. Things like those Grand Slams are awfully consistent and overwhelming for opponents. So how's Deck of Lunacy going to be changed? Well, I think mana is probably the easiest fix here and the cleanest, most simple fix to understand. So pushing this to something like 4 mana really does slow down the opportunity for those early game blowups off of Deck of Lunacy. It means aggro decks have more time to just stabilize the board and rush down the Mage. It just makes it harder to get that going as soon as possible. So I think that's an easy fix. Other people have done things like introduce more chaos by saying like, make the spells cost some range from like 1 to 4 mana more. I don't really think that's as elegant of a fix. Card text is already pretty stuffed in on this one, so adding extra words and extra numbers could make it not fit in the box well, which Blizzard is actually really, really concerned about those sorts of things. 4 lines of text for collectible cards has been the max historically. So I think they'll probably just go with an easy mana fix here and probably bump it by at least 2 mana. I doubt 1 mana really solves the problem in their mind. So I would say Deck of Lunacy to 4 mana is the most likely fix. But if you have some other cool ideas, of course, share those in the comments below. Okay, so moving on here to Refreshing Spring Water. This is an alternative solution, perhaps, to the Lunacy Mage problem, and a card that many people have identified as the one they think is the real problem in Lunacy Mage, because it's the new card from Forged in the Barrens, and it seems like maybe introducing that opened this up. I disagree with that sentiment personally. I think it's much more about the fact that we had a rotation and the spell pool being reduced and condensed down to really good cards is what made Lunacy more viable. Refreshing Spring Water certainly doesn't hurt. It's a great card draw tool for a Mage deck that's all spells. That's quite clear. It's just 0 mana, draw 2. I think it's probably fine on its own. I wouldn't personally adjust Refreshing Spring Water. If you were going to address this, if this was the card you decided to change, instead of Deck of Lunacy, I think something as simple as Refreshing 1 mana Crystal would be fine. Maybe just pushing it to 5 mana so it's not totally free to play. Both of those would be ways to limit Refreshing Spring Water. But I'd almost hate to destroy this really cool all spell Mage support card when it feels like Deck of Lunacy is the much more visible, much more higher win rate, higher variability spike sort of card, whereas Springwater just feels like a really consistent tool for an otherwise cool deck if it wasn't for Lunacy just blowing things up, basically. So now let's move over to Paladin, which I actually think Paladin from a win rate standpoint is way more problematic than Lunacy Mage. Lunacy Mage is a good deck. It's being played particularly at High Legend really successfully, but Paladin right now is dominant across a couple archetypes or sub-archetypes at the very least, with the secret package being a big part of that. And the secret package is really driven right now by Sword of the Fallen. It's not Commander Smithy or, the legendary Spotlight card. It's Sword of the Fallen that's really enabling the early game dominance of Paladin, and this little secret core of Sword of the Paladin or Sword of the Fallen and Northwatch Commander and a couple secrets is making its way into various Paladin lists, whether dedicated to secrets or more of a Libram package. And that's just because this card's a ridiculous amount of free tempo, right? You get basically 3 secrets out of it. The weapon itself has a little bit of value to help you keep early boards in check. Some of those secrets are really disruptive. You filter down your deck so that you're drawing better while still being able to run low cost secrets to gain tempo in the early game, all of which is this magic combination that makes Sword of the Fallen really, really good and have an absurd mulligan win rate. So initially I thought like this card didn't feel that bad to play against, so it might not be the thing that Blizzard nerfs, but after reviewing Paladin, there's no other like card that feels worse or has more visibility into the Paladin problem. I think Pinflinger is another nerf target, which we'll talk about shortly, which goes hand in hand with Paladin's success. So perhaps Pinflinger alone is enough to nerf Paladin, but I don't think so. I think we'll see both Pinflinger affected because it is a neutral card, and perhaps Sword of the Fallen as well nerfed because it really does seem to be the driving force here for Paladin's early game dominance. Now, how is this going to be changed? I think maybe just moving it to 2 durabilities pretty easy so they don't get so many secrets. That'll occasionally disrupt some of the secret synergy stuff. Maybe you want to play Northwatch Commander on turn 5 and it's a lot harder because you only have 2 durability for your Sword of the Fallen, but you're still enabling things like Northwatch on 3, so you're not totally breaking the consistency of the secret package. You could also push this to 3 mana. I think that's actually pretty harmful for a card like this one. It competes with cards like Northwatch Commander at that spot, so you would be really disrupting that entire set of cards if you pushed it to 3. So I think a durability adjustment here is probably the right way to go for this card. So this next card is probably one you didn't expect to see. There's going to be a few more of those in this video, I'm sure. It's First Day of School for Paladin. You know, right now the secret weapon is getting all the hate for Paladin, but when I look at the numbers and I think about all the ways Paladin seems to beat me, First Day of School is actually ranking near the top of that list these days because it's giving Paladin such a ridiculous opener in so many games, setting up things like turn 2 Hand of Adals, sometimes giving them extra Libram discounts. And if you look at the 1 mana card pool right now in standard format, there's a lot of good 1 mana minions, some really powerful effects, some just good stats on board, and that extra oomph out of First Day of School is really helping propel Paladin to the top of the meta. Now, that said, that is a problem which kind of fixes itself over time, right? If we introduce more week 1 drops, the consistency and overall power level may go down in the 1 mana pool, and First Day of School might get weaker along the way. In the meantime, though, this does feel like it's one of the great enablers for Paladin at the moment. So, do I think this is a likely nerf? No, not really. I think the secret stuff is probably much more readily available for nerfs at the moment. But First Day of School is in the back of my mind as a possibility for a card that Blizzard might want to target. As far as how they change it, that's pretty tough on this one. Maybe you just make it 1 mana to slow it down. I'm afraid that would totally kill the card, though, because it would deny tempo. So I'm not sure how you tweak this one to make it any better. That might be another reason it doesn't see nerfed. But if you have any thoughts, I am certainly curious to hear them in the comments below. Now, that said, before we get into the rest of this video, which includes, I think, some cards which are going to be hotly debated, particularly among the neutral set, I did want to talk about our sponsor for this video. It's Fatal Core. If you don't know Fatal Core, it's a really cool community-driven card game, and it has 0 purchases. 0. Yeah, that's right. Fatal Core is crowdfunded, so it's completely backed by the community, which means, of course, the community has a huge influence on how the game develops, and everybody's rewarded when goals are met, even if you don't contribute financially. And on top of that, I think Fatal Core is a really strategically rewarding game. Everything is played face up, which of course allows for a ton of strategic decision making and counterplay options. So not only are you going to have fun, but the team at Fatal Core is really looking to change the way card games are monetized. And as you know, I always say games are way too expensive, and it's nice to see a change there. So how can you help? Well, there's a link in the description to the Steam profile for Fatal Core. It's not out quite yet, but add it to your wish list. That's huge for indie developers. It goes a really, really long way to helping the game find more people and find success. And of course, if you want to join the beta, there's also a link for that in the description below. Not only will you get to play some Fatal Core, but you'll get a special bonus. If you log in by April 15th, you'll receive a rare foil Baragast card, and this dude looks really, really cool. That'll help you kick off your Fatal Core collection. So check out those links in the description and maybe change the way we monetize card games. All right, big thanks to Fatal Core for sponsoring this video. If cards like Pinflinger here behind me are driving you nuts, I would certainly encourage you to check them out. It seems like a great team who's doing good stuff for the card game industry. That said, for now, we got to talk about Pinflinger. So this is another card that a lot of people have discussed. From a win rate standpoint specifically, Pinflinger looks okay. Looking at the numbers, nothing too crazy there. But from an annoyance standpoint and from a feel standpoint, I think Pinflinger has some huge problems. There are really two aspects to it. First off, his appearance and voice line are super annoying and incredibly repetitive. You just have to keep hearing them over and over and over again. Clearly that was by design, but it works a little too well, and I think people are frankly just sick of it. And that may seem like a silly way to nerf a card or silly reason to nerf a card, but again, I don't actually think it is. I think fun is the #1 goal in a video game. You play for fun, and if Pinflinger's making you have less fun, there you go. Now, beyond that, it's actually not just like the voice line, but just the fact that you're sitting there watching your opponent do a million actions, maybe per your one action. So, you know, they get to do 20, 30 things in a turn because they're just bouncing Pinflingers like crazy, and you're just kind of playing one or two cards. It feels like the time spent or the fun being had is a little bit inequitable, and your opponent's just getting to do way more and have way more actions and way more fun. And you start to feel that imbalance a little bit. So cards like Pinflinger can discourage you some. They just feel like you're not playing the same game your opponent's playing, and you're doing more watching than playing, and that can often lead to a bad experience as well. So I actually do think Pinflinger getting a tweak to reduce its impact and viability would go a long way towards making people's lives a lot easier. So a couple changes people have tossed around, you know, like 2 mana. I think 2 mana would actually be too punishing for Pinflinger. It'd be really, really hard to play. I would say instead maybe limit its damage to minions instead of making it go face, so that it's this great kind of board swingy tool or value generator tool where you're able to spend your mana and convert that into denying your opponent's boards, but maybe not this is like inevitable chip damage that, say, like Paladin often uses it for, or they're just hitting you for 3 or 4 per turn, and then eventually you die to this Pinflinger onslaught because you just don't have enough life gain, or eventually they just whittle you down, death by 1,000 pins essentially. So I would just make it minion damage only. It would still be a viable card for things like Rogue that want to utilize the Battlecry synergies or combo synergies, but it would reduce some of that annoyance because you wouldn't see it quite as often, I'm sure. So next up here is Animated Broomstick. This isn't a card we're seeing a ton right now in the meta, but it's been a card that was everywhere in past metas. It turns out enabling your big crazy stuff to attack immediately can create some fantastic swings on board and really help you stabilize games. And for only 1 mana, Broomstick here wasn't much of a tax to pay to achieve those sorts of swing turns. So a lot of people said this card's in every deck. We should nerf it. It's too strong, make it a little bit harder to play. That's reasonable. I actually don't think it needs a nerf though. I think if you asked me a month or two ago, I would have said, yeah, sure, nerf Broomstick. It's too problematic. But as we see, just depending on the meta, depending on what exists, Broomstick's gonna kind of rise and fall a little bit in popularity and success rate. And certainly right now, it doesn't feel like it's oppressive at all. It's a card we don't even really see all that much. And I think even if we did, I'm kind of cool with it. I like decks and big cards having the ability to react. Otherwise, sometimes big, expensive stuff's hard to play. So Broomstick existing as an enabler, I think I like it. I actually think it's pretty cool for Hearthstone and good for the game. So many people are requesting this for a nerf. Blizzard has mentioned it specifically as a card they were looking at in the past. I wouldn't be shocked if it, say, went to 2 mana, but I personally don't think it needs to. I'm cool with Broomstick as is. So next up here is the Far Watch Post, and you can probably include the other Watch Post here as well. At the very least, we can think about it. And of course, these are popping into a lot of different decks right now in Hearthstone. This Watch Post package basically supplementing people's early game options, and pretty frustrating to play against in many cases, I have to say. Far Watch Post in particular, I think, with the mana increase, can really limit what you can do and make you feel like your cards aren't as useful or much harder to play, and that's a pretty disruptive experience. And if your opponent gets like 2 of these down, you can't react to them immediately. It kind of feels like you're locked out of the game. Now, for me personally, I think watch posts are actually really cool. I wouldn't nerf these at all. I understand the perspective and how frustrating they can get, but I think it's kind of fun almost to like just ignore them and play the game around them. We've had so many instances where that was a really fun shift on the game, and it's just like, ha, you idiot, you can't attack with your minions, and we're still going to beat you. So I think, just depending on the matchup and scenario, these actually create some pretty cool divergent moments in Hearthstone where you're suddenly thinking differently and playing differently. And I also think their popularity is probably going to fall a little bit over time as people kind of learn to work around them, or as decks just get more refined. It feels like to me we'll see less and less watch posts in the meta. So I do understand these are frustrating sometimes. I do understand they're disruptive. People will call for them to be nerfed for that reason. That's why I've included it here. It's a totally reasonable suggestion, particularly just because they're very, very popular. But for me, I'm actually cool with watch posts as is. I don't think these need to get changed. I think they're going to land in a pretty healthy spot and a surprisingly viable spot, more so than I expected at the very least. So all in all, I think watch posts are pretty cool designed cards, and I don't want to see them nerfed. So next up here is Jandis. And yeah, you forgot about Jandis, didn't you? Jandis, not seeing play in Mage these days because Lunacy Mage is really the dominant deck there. Still seeing play in Rogue. And in fact, Jandis is kind of high rollier than ever right now. Or maybe not even necessarily high rollier, but she's better than ever because the minion pool has been reduced to some really good 5-drops. There are only a couple low rolls and some really fantastic minions in the pool, which makes Jandis really consistent. So, she's not as high rolly technically because she's rolling high way more often. It's actually super consistent right now. It's just always a high roll, it feels like, with Jandis. So, it's not feeling as bad at the moment because we don't see it as much, but Jandis has been one of the strongest legendary cards of the last year. She's been very, very prominent and sometimes very frustrating to lose to. So even though she's not top of mind at the moment, I wouldn't be shocked if Blizzard goes in and tweaks Jandis here a little bit. I think you could push Jandis to 6 mana, and frankly, she would still be a pretty viable card. I think a lot of decks would still be able to play this successfully at 6 mana. There might be another way to tweak this one if you can think of one in the comments below. I'm not expecting a Jandis nerf necessarily, but I think this was probably a card that was very much at the top of Blizzard's radar until this most recent meta, and it might remain something they look forward to in the future. And it's like, well, is Jandis going to be a problem again? We got to keep that in mind. Maybe we'll tweak Jandis a little bit just to be safe. So don't be totally shocked if Jandis gets nerfed. I think this was a pain point card throughout much of the last 6 months or whatever since Skullman's Academy. It's only getting a slight reprieve right now, but it's still really, really good and still great in Rogue. So keep an eye on it. And then finally, for my last card here, I think this one's probably going to come as a surprise to a lot of people. Talon Fordring, I think, is a nerf possibility, because this right now is the most popular legendary card in Hearthstone, and it's being played in 25% of decks. That's a lot. For a neutral card, I mean, of course, you could play it in a lot of decks, but 25 is still really high, higher than a card like Kazakus, for instance. And I don't think that's a problem. I actually think Talon's a really healthy card. I think he's really cool, well designed, but it's trending towards that sort of territory where you keep an eye on it. Like, is this enabling too many things? Are there shenanigans afoot here where drawing high cost minions is going to eventually be a problem? At the moment, I don't think it is. There's no deck that's like abusing this. It's doing some cool stuff like OTK Hunter, but nobody's gaining an unfair advantage with Talon. But when it's already this reliable, sort of at a base level without any game-breaking sort of combo enabler, what happens in future sets? Is that something Blizzard's going to be mindful of, where it's like, man, Talon's already really good. If we print this stuff, he's going to be too good, right? Like, he's going to be everywhere. He's going to be meta-defining. And does he get a preemptive tweak because of that possibility? Keep an eye on it. I think it's an absolute possibility. We don't see too many neutral legendaries see this rate of play. Certainly the Ziliaxes of old, trended much higher even than Talon, but this is a really, really solid play rate for a card like this one. So I don't think it needs nerfed. I don't actually think it will be nerfed, but it's a slim possibility that I think most people probably haven't considered. This is a really, really good neutral legendary, and bonus points, it's free, which is awesome. I love that we're getting good cards like this one for free as a part of the core set. And there you go. That wraps it up for this nerf theories and possibilities discussion. And I'm really excited to see what you guys think is going to get nerfed and what changes are necessary to fix these cards, or if you don't think anything deserves to be nerfed. If you like the meta how it is, certainly feel free to share those thoughts as well. I'm also curious about card buffs. We were getting those for a while, and now it feels like we're not getting them as much. So I'm worried, you know, we swing the pendulum too far. We kill some of these classes. Does Mage need something else if like Deck of Lunacy and Jandice get nerfed? Maybe they need a buff to like Hero Power Mage. Wildfire to 1. I want to see those sorts of things as well. So share all that down there in the comments below. Also be sure to check out our sponsor via those links in the description and pinned comment. I think that's a great initiative and a team who really cares about making the card game industry better. So your support goes a long way. All that said, thanks much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.
Yeah.